Good morning, Wabash. That's still cool in 2022. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Bill Cook, class of '66, with his talk titled, After Wabash, Remembering How to Learn 55 Years Later. Dr. Cook was born and raised in Indianapolis, graduated from Arsenal Tech High School in 1962. At Wabash, he was a member of the class of 1966, a history major, Glee Club member, and Lambda Chi. After Wabash, he earned an MA and PhD in medieval history at Cornell. He taught at the State University of New York at Geneseo, about 60 miles from Buffalo, for 42 years. He has written 5 books and lectured in more than 20 countries. In 2010, he received the honorary degrees of Doctor of Humane Letters from Wabash. He is single, has adopted children, one of whom is Eric Hoon of the class of 2007, and he was a member of Kappa Sig. He returned to teach at Wabash in the religion department from 2008 to 2010, as well as 2013. He has taught 4 immersion courses, 2 in Italy and 2 in Kenya. He is here for 2 weeks to teach with Professor Warner on a course entitled Christianity in Africa, and he will meet those students in Kenya in March. After retirement, Dr. Cook established the Bill Cook Foundation, a U.S. charity that distributes about $500,000 each year in aid to schools and students in 30 countries on 5 continents. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Cook.
Good morning, Wabash. We didn't used to say that when I was here. We didn't have microphones. Just kidding. In 1962, I matriculated to Wabash College, 60 years ago. I was kind of a high school star in Indianapolis. That is to say, I was second in my class of 500, and I was the president of the student body, and all that sort of stuff. And I'd lived a very privileged, comfortable life. With my parents, I had traveled to 48 states, seen all kinds of things. They let me go to Europe once before I came to Wabash. I had met governors and senators because I was politically active. My parents were wonderful and loving. I was comfortable and expected to remain so. I had some moments. For example, I can remember being in New York City and my parents drove down along the Bowery, which was where all the homeless people lived. Well, I didn't have homeless people in my neighborhood in Indianapolis, and that was quite a shock to me, and I remembered it. I discovered it again when my high school class went to a trip to Chicago, and I found myself, I don't quite know how, on Skid Row. I also had had a clash with the advisor to the student council because she was, how do we put this mildly, a racist. But still, I was pretty comfortable. I kind of knew what the world was like and what my place was. And then Wabash happened. And everything changed. The very first semester, one of the guest speakers at Chapel, standing at this very place, was a guy named Herb Philbrick. I know that name means nothing to you, but it meant everything to people my age because there was a TV series that was about his life. It was called I Led 3 Lives. He was a father, he was a communist, but he was really a guy who worked for the FBI and infiltrated the communists. And I had watched the TV show, and that's exciting to have a TV guy here. He didn't play himself on TV, but everybody knew the name Herb Philbrick. But outside were a group of college professors, my college professors, who were protesting that the college brought him here, and the Indianapolis Star reporters were enjoying every bit of the conflict. I didn't quite get it, but life apparently wasn't as simple as I thought. I had a biology professor, Elliot Williams. We called him Bugsy because he studied bugs. And Bugsy was a tough guy. I broke my arm my first year at Wabash, and in biology class, this is a very important lesson for you to learn, it's hard to dissect a frog with one hand. Hey, trust me on this one. So I invented a way to do it. I'd take the box that had the little tools, I'd put my cast on the box, I'd take the knife in my other hand and saw up the frog. And I'm not doing very well, and Dr. Williams walks by and said, "God damn it, Cook, that's the ugliest dissection I've ever seen in my life." Give me a break, dude, but you couldn't say that to Professor Williams. I met my advisor. His name was Jim Barnes. It was his first semester of teaching. He lives in Crawfordsville today and just recently celebrated his 90th birthday. And Jim Barnes was blind. And I'd never been around a blind person before. And I was in his office talking to him, and I was uncomfortable and trying to figure out what's it like to be blind. And being a clever 18-year-old, I had an idea. How about this? When nobody else is walking around the Lambda Chi house, I'll walk around with my eyes closed. And I'd feel my way around, and I'll figure out what it's like to be Jim Barnes. And I did that several times, and I thought I was sort of getting it. You probably know what's coming, right? And then one day, I touched something I didn't recognize, and of course, I opened my eyes. And I realized I couldn't understand what it was like to be Jim Barnes. And that was a shock to me. I thought college was all about resolving all of life's problems and figuring out everything so I could be even more comfortable than I was before. But it didn't turn out that way. In that first year, I met an enduring friend of mine named David Kendall, who is, among other things, the lawyer for Bill and Hillary Clinton now, and was a Rhodes Scholar. And David Kendall became one of my most important teachers at Wabash. When Pat White was president of Wabash, he used to say to the freshmen on Freshman Saturday, when they were all up on the balcony, "Gentlemen," he'd say, "look to your left and look to your right. Those are two of your most important teachers." And he was right. David Kendall was certainly one of mine. Smartest guy I ever met to this day. And I met a lot of smart people. So one day in Lilly Library, when we were juniors, he stopped me and says, "Bill, I got a problem." I thought, oh boy, this is going to be good. He said, "I didn't get as good a grade as you did on the history exam. Can you tutor me and help me learn to be a better history student?" That's why he's the smartest guy I ever met. That is to say, he has not only the intelligence, the IQ, he also has the humility to understand when maybe somebody not as smart as he is can help him. By the way, he got an A in the course and I got an A-, but I never held that too much against him. I just took it to mean I was a hell of a teacher. I took a linguistics course with Professor Dick Strawn, and the course was about one thing. We had a student in my class named Armand Luhahi, who came from what was then called the Belgian Congo, now called the, I guess I can take this off, Democratic Republic of Congo. And the whole project of the semester was to learn his tribal language without speaking to him in any of the languages we had in common. Holy smokes, is that hard? You know, that's sort of Columbus landing and trying to figure out what those folks are saying and them trying to figure out what he's saying. And we would act things out and we would point to things and you would do this, and then you realize you don't know whether he gave you the word for head, cheek, sideburn, white, or anything else. And we had to figure out his language. And we didn't do it very well, but we struggled and made some progress, and that was really one of the great experiments of my life, which tells me something about things that are possible and things that you can never completely figure out. I'm never going to be a real speaker of that language. Other things happened. On November 22nd, 1963, I walked into the Scarlet Inn after a class, and the woman behind the counter was clearly distressed, and she said, "The president's been shot, the president's been shot." And I turned to her and said, "Who would want to shoot Byron Trippett?" My world was still pretty small. And it took me that to realize what a moronic thing that was to say. The first day of my junior year, that is to say the year that the freshmen came, we had a freshman move into the Lambda Chi house, not yet as a pledge, named Stan Kovalevsky. First generation college student, oldest of 9 children, all of whom were there, father and mother beaming with pride. And Mr. Kovalevsky decided to take a walk around campus before the actual event of Freshman Sunday it was in those days. And he walked around apparently beaming and wanting to meet everybody, walked into Center Hall, and dropped dead of a massive heart attack. It was horrible. So Stan went home with his mother and 8 children, came back a couple weeks later. And I watched that family because every week they came to Crawfordsville, because Stan's the oldest boy and the oldest child, and we kind of adopted that family. We played with all the little Kovalevskys. Stan got started late. He made it. He wasn't a great student, but he made it, graduated, had a good career, still around. But watching that family, I'm an only child. I didn't have any idea what this would lead to. And to watch that family and Stan's strength and the courage of his mother and the help of the brothers at Lambda Chi to sort of get to know their kids and play with them when they came down, that was an extraordinary experience. I learned a lot of things from Stan I never learned from any professor at Wabash College. He, too, was one of my teachers. I took my roommate, Alan Winslow, who was from Salem, Indiana, not exactly a metropolis, in the southern part of the state. We went to Indianapolis one time, and since I was an urban kid and went to Tech High School, had a lot of black students, I'm going to show him black Indianapolis. Oh, boy. So we walk along Indiana Avenue, which is sort of the main street of the black part of the city, and I see some guys I know from Tech High School, and we start chatting. And at the end, Alan walked up to me and said, I didn't understand anything they said, and I didn't understand anything you said. I never knew that as I hung out with those guys in high school, I was sort of adapting a little bit to their culture. I had no idea that that was happening. I would have never known had Alan not seen that and pointed out to me. He's one of my teachers. One of my teachers who got paid, John Fisher, who taught classics, on my first exam gave me the grade of F+. I had studied the wrong material for the exam. When I went to see him, John said, Bill, that was not a grade, that was an insult. This place is a pretty tough place. Can't cut a damn frog one-handed, get an F+ from a guy who plans to insult me. But the worst insult I ever got was as a senior in my last semester. I wrote a paper for Professor Eric Dean, as in Dean Gallery. And his one comment on it was, clever, but not profound. Please, just go ahead and shoot me now. What he was saying is, it was a good paper, but you're smarter than that. You could have done better. And that was an insult too, and he meant it that way. And I really did appreciate it, although not at the moment. I took a course with Eric my last semester, and it was a course about modern theology, and Wabash brought to campus for 2 weeks the hottest theologian in the world. I realize not everybody knows who the hottest theologian of the world is at any given moment. But this was a guy who had written a bestseller and who spent his weekend between his 2 weeks at Wabash visiting Martin Luther King. That's a pretty important guy. So I had this exposure to sort of the great thinking right here in little old Crawfordsville, Indiana. I listened to David Kendall, as a junior and senior, my friend, talk about Freedom Summer in Mississippi, because he was there. And one of his roommates in the training part to go to Mississippi was murdered. Those are things you never forget. As I said, David Kendall was one of my important teachers. When I was a senior, I had to go to Chicago for a scholarship interview, so I hopped on the Monon. And who's sitting right there when I walk in but Lou Salter, who was then a professor of physics, later president of the college, and now a Hall. And this was 1966. We talked about politics, we talked about racial politics, and I was a pretty not very well informed or thoughtful person on many of these issues. And every time I made a point, Lou, in his very gentle and absolutely persuasive way, destroyed it. and made me totally rethink race in America in 1966. And it didn't take long for me to need to use that. Because over spring break, we had incoming freshmen the next fall come to live at the house for Honor Scholars Weekend. I know it doesn't work that way anymore. And we had a young fellow from Chicago named Frank Ling, who was Chinese. And we met about whether we were going to pledge all these guys who were there. And there were objections to pledging Frank Ling because there were certain people at the Lambda Chi and every other house. All houses were all white except the Teaks. And there were some of my fraternity brothers didn't want a Chinese guy because they knew that was the path to having black members. And we had a pretty hairy debate about it. And every point I made at the debate, I learned from Lou Salter on the Monon to Chicago. And Brother Frank Ling is now a very distinguished medical doctor living in Memphis, Tennessee. So I left Wabash pretty well educated by faculty, sometimes really tough ones, by doing a lot of hard work, by having, again, a group of classmates and older and younger students as my fellow teachers. And I went off to Cornell to do my study of medieval history. One time while I was in Ithaca, New York, I came back because one of my fraternity brothers and friends was returning from Vietnam. I met him at the airport. I saw him walk off the plane. There was no security at that time. And I knew something was radically different. I didn't know what it was. We had corresponded some while he was in Vietnam, but I knew there was something about him that was radically different. I knew there was a pain that would never quite be resolved. We're still friends. He's been through drug addiction and a number of other things. He's also been a survivor. He's a medical doctor. And the expression on his face once again said, hey, you're a pretty smart guy. You've got a Phi Beta Kappa key, and you don't know a damn thing. You don't understand about Vietnam. You don't understand about what it's like to be there. And my fraternity brother Mark was my teacher in some ways about Vietnam, in ways books could never do that. I arrived in the town of Geneseo, New York in 1970 to begin 42 years of teaching. And I decided what I was going to try to do is teach like some combination of my Wabash professors. And by the way, that worked out pretty damn well. But it was a tough year. I started in September. The previous May, students had been murdered on Kent State University campus protesting the war. I had a young woman come to my office one day saying, if you don't change my boyfriend's grade, he's going to flunk out, he's going to get drafted, he's going to be sent to Vietnam, he's going to get killed, and it's your fault. How do I address that? How do I deal with that? They don't teach you that in graduate school. They don't talk about that in the faculty lounge. I had to wrestle with that. But I'd wrestled with Vietnam through my friend Mark Eversole when I saw him come off the plane. And I've wrestled with discrimination. I've wrestled with a lot of other things because I had all those teachers at Wabash, paid and unpaid. And I was able, I think, to get through that. 50 years later, I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm still uncomfortable. I still want to do important things. I still constantly am aware how much I don't know. When I retired, and people said, what are you going to do? I was only a mere 68. That was 10 years ago. Do the math. I told people that in retirement, a lot of professors say this, I'm going to do what I've been doing for the last 42 years, except A, I'm not going to have to grade exams, and B, and more importantly, I'll never have to go to another department meeting. Notice who's laughing back there the most, right? They know. But you know, I don't think I believed that. I don't think I really did believe that, and it didn't last very long. And I decided to start the Bill Cook Foundation to help poor kids go to school. I'm a European historian, so I travel to Europe all the time. I spent many, many summers in Italy. I actually have an apartment in Italy. But only toward the end of my career did I begin to travel to the rest of the world, to South America in 2004, and to sub-Saharan Africa the same year, and to Asia for the first time in 2007. Now my foundation works in 9 African countries, 8 Asian countries, and 8 Latin American countries. Now I spend my time hanging out in slums on 4 continents. And I'm in some of the countries that, at least if you read the newspaper, are the worst countries in the world. I spend time in Honduras and Myanmar and South Sudan. How do I figure out how to do this stuff? Well, let me tell you, there are lots of things I need to know from lots of different people, but I can tell you that one of my pledge brothers is on my board, and 3 of the students I taught at Wabash when I was back teaching here are on my board of advisors, one of whom is chair of the committee to figure out what to do when I die. I call it the What Happens When Bill Cook Croaks Committee. They've got a nicer name for it. And I've sent Wabash students as interns to Myanmar and to Uganda and to Central and South America. I work with the Wabash College Global Health Initiative. I got invited to go to Peru and see what they're doing down there. And I liked what I saw. And so, with some funds that we provided, we helped to start a program for what originally was 1 Down syndrome child, which became 2 Down syndrome children, which is now 10 Down syndrome children. And recently, having my arm very powerfully twisted by a certain member of the biology department whose name will remain unsaid. All right, it was Eric Wetzel. He sort of twisted my arm, and now my foundation has signed a 5-year, $100,000 deal to continue that program for Down syndrome children. I have 2 students from Wabash who came from Vietnam. They both helped me with projects in Vietnam. One of the things I'm proudest of, and I'm going to put my mask on, is the fact that we funded a program during the pandemic in Bangladesh. We had a project in Bangladesh. This is the flag of Bangladesh. We had a project there to work both with a refugee camp and also with the people who live near it. And I get an email saying, when the kids are not in school, they don't get food at home. We need food, and we need food now for the kids and their families. What are you going to do about it? Well, there was a student from Bangladesh who was at Wabash when I was back to teach, named Arano Haq. He was a senior in 2014, and alas, unfortunately, for reasons that I think we'll never know, committed suicide. But there's still a Facebook page called Remembering Arano Haq. So I went on the Facebook page and said, hey guys, let's get with it. I need some food to help feed Bangladeshis. Let's do this in honor of Arano. $3,000 the first day. We fed lots and lots and lots of people. And I worked with a school in Cambodia. And there were some very bright young men that needed a place to go to college in the United States, and I came up with the wacky idea of Wabash College. They're members of the class of 2019, and all doing fine. I learned about a Wabash student whom I didn't know when I was here from the class of 12, named Jacob Moore, a townie. And Jacob Moore had been in the Peace Corps in Cameroon, and he started a small foundation to continue some of the work he'd done in the Peace Corps. I contacted him, and 2 days ago, and not for the first time, I handed him a check for $7,000 to help 100 displaced children in a civil war to go to school in Cameroon. I had planned before the pandemic to go visit that guy whose tribal language I tried to learn at Wabash, who's now a mathematics professor in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Had to put that on hold, but I'll get there, and I know one of the things he'll do is take me to some places that, in fact, need a lot of help. Oh, and I'll ask anybody for money. My youngest donor is Silas Hartnett, the son of Dr. Jeremy Hartnett and Dr. Lamberton. So nobody's too young, nobody's too old, nobody's even too poor for me to beg for money. I'll just put a hat up here. Now, at the end, old people are supposed to give young people advice. Gentlemen, I'm supposed to say, here's my advice. If you want to live a comfortable life, if you want to have everything figured out, transfer. Get the hell out of here, because you're in the wrong place. You're going to live an uncomfortable life. You're going to live a life when you have to change, revise, and sometimes scrap your ideas of how the world works or how the world should work. It's true that Wabash always fights, but Wabash does a hell of a lot more than fight. Thank you, gentlemen.